In a distant part of the galaxy, far away from every known planet, there was a small blue-green world called Valara. It was a beautiful planet once, covered with shining oceans and silver cities, but now it was slowly dying. The light of its sun was fading, the atmosphere growing colder each day. Once full of laughter and life, Valara had turned into a planet of silence, fear, and hope that was running out. The Valari were a peaceful race, intelligent and full of creativity. They had no weapons, no armies, and no enemies. They had always believed that kindness was stronger than power, but now their kindness could not stop their dying sun. Every scientist on Valara worked day and night to save their world, but every plan failed. The energy shields broke down, the crops stopped growing, and millions were forced to live underground to escape the deadly cold above. In one of the last standing science stations, a group of Valari engineers were gathered around a huge transmission machine. It was old, full of cracks and rust, but it was their last hope. They wanted to send a message, a cry for help to the galaxy. Somewhere out there, they believed someone would listen. Their leader, a scientist named Thalen, was exhausted but determined. His eyes were dim from sleepless nights, but his voice still carried strength. "We can't give up," he told his team. "If anyone hears us, anyone at all, they might help us survive." They built the signal using the last bits of energy left in their power grid. The message was meant to reach the Celestial Accord, a powerful galactic alliance known for helping dying worlds. The words were simple: "We are the Valari. Our sun is dying. We seek help, not war." The message carried coordinates, details of their planet's condition, and a plea for mercy. But as they began the transmission, something went wrong. A sudden surge of energy from the unstable reactor caused the transmitter to spark and flicker. The coded frequencies twisted, data lines broke, and some parts of the message scrambled into unknown forms. The scientists didn't realize it, but their peaceful message had changed. Instead of a soft plea for help, it now contained tones and signal patterns that sounded like a challenge, like a declaration of war. The transmission shot across the galaxy, faster than light, carried by old communication satellites and forgotten relay stations. It was meant to reach the Alliance capital, but instead it bounced off a decaying satellite and took a new direction, toward a small blue planet that no one in the galaxy cared about. A planet called Earth. On Earth, in the cold silence of Antarctica, a long-range space monitoring array picked up something strange. For decades, the array had detected nothing but static and meteor signals. But one night the system began to beep urgently. A young operator named David was on duty when he saw it. At first he thought it was an error, but when the data started forming patterns, his hands froze on the keyboard. The screen displayed repeating signals, sharp, rhythmic, and complex. David's heart started racing. He called his supervisor, and within minutes the entire base was awake. Scientists and engineers gathered around as the strange signal repeated itself over and over. The data showed an intelligent pattern, something not made by nature. It was the first clear sign of alien communication humanity had ever received. The discovery spread fast. Within days, every major government knew about it. The world's media couldn't stop talking. "Humanity receives message from the stars," the headlines screamed. People filled the streets celebrating. Some cried with joy, others with fear. For the first time, humans knew they were not alone. In secret, a team of linguists, codebreakers, and astrophysicists started decoding the signal. They discovered coordinates to a distant star system and what looked like a message, though much of it was broken. The words seemed emotional, full of desperation, but there were strange patterns mixed within. Some believed it was a request for help. Others thought it was a warning, and a few military officials believed it could be a threat. Meetings were held in underground rooms where world leaders discussed what to do. "If it's a cry for help, we must respond," said one. "And if it's a trap?" another asked. No one could be sure, but humans had always been explorers, always drawn to the unknown. They had crossed oceans, climbed mountains, and walked on the moon. The decision was made. Humanity would respond. Across Earth, preparations began for something that had never been done before, a mission beyond the solar system. The United Earth Defense Council was formed, combining the brightest minds from every nation. Scientists built new propulsion drives, engineers designed ships capable of traveling years through the void, and military officers planned for every possible danger. The fleet was named the Artemis Armada. At first, the plan was for a small group of ships to travel to the signal's origin, but fear of the unknown changed everything. Earth's history was full of wars and survival against harsh odds. Humanity knew how dangerous the universe could be, even if they didn't yet know what lived in it. They decided to go prepared, not as explorers, but as survivors. And so the Artemis Armada became something no other species in the galaxy had ever built. The ships were massive, layered with armor that could survive meteor impacts powered by reactors that burned hotter than stars. They carried not only scientists but soldiers, medics, and engineers. They weren't built for conquest but for protection. Yet to other worlds, such power would look terrifying. As the fleet prepared, something strange began happening across the galaxy. Other species, old, wise, and fearful, noticed the movement of the Deathworlders. That was what the galaxy called humans, the ones who came from a world of storms, fire, and gravity too strong for most life to survive. To them, Earth was a cursed planet that bred resilience and danger. When humanity moved, the stars themselves seemed to watch. Back on Valara, the people still waited, unaware of what their message had become. Their cities grew darker each day. Children slept under metal blankets as the cold deepened. Thalen sat beside the dying transmitter, whispering to himself, "Please, someone, hear us." He had no idea that someone had heard them, just not the ones they expected. Months later, as the human fleet finally prepared for launch, the world watched in awe. Families gathered around screens, seeing the giant ships rise from Earth's surface like mountains made of steel. Every thruster roar felt like history in motion. Humanity was stepping into the unknown, guided by a broken signal and endless curiosity. But no one realized the truth yet. The message that started all of this had not been one of peace, it had sounded like war. And somewhere in the deep darkness of space, civilizations that feared humanity for centuries started whispering warnings to one another. "The Deathworlders are moving," they said. "Something has awakened them." And far beyond the stars, the Valari continued to pray, hoping that whoever heard them would come to save them. They didn't know that the help they had called for was already on its way, powerful, unstoppable, and human. It had all started with a mistake. A tiny distortion in a dying machine, a wrong code, a twisted frequency. But that mistake was about to change everything, not just for the Valari, but for the entire galaxy. Because humanity had received the signal, and when humanity heard a cry for help, they never ignored it. They answered, always. But this time they would answer in a way no one could ever forget. The mysterious signal from deep space had spread like fire across the planet. At first, people thought it was just another scientific rumor. But when governments confirmed that the message was real and not from Earth, the world went silent. Every country, every scientist, every curious mind turned their eyes to the stars. Humanity had waited for this moment for centuries, proof that they were not alone. But what started as excitement soon became something deeper, something heavier. No one truly understood what kind of message had arrived, and that made everyone uneasy. In the huge underground base of the United Earth Defense Council, the best minds were gathered in a single room. The signal was played again and again through powerful speakers. It was haunting, a mix of sounds, pulses, and tones that no one could fully understand. The linguists said it had emotion, sadness, and urgency in it. The military analysts thought it sounded like warning tones. Everyone was guessing, but nobody knew for sure. The only thing clear was that the coordinates pointed to a dying star system far beyond human reach. Debates began in every hall of power. Some leaders wanted to ignore it, fearing it could be a trap. Others believed humanity had a duty to respond, to show that they were a species of compassion, not fear. Finally, after long discussions, the council made a decision that would define history. Humanity would respond, but they would respond carefully. They would send a fleet to the coordinates in the signal, not as conquerors but as explorers ready for any danger. Scientists and engineers worked day and night. Every space agency on Earth combined their resources. The Artemis Project was born, a mission to travel farther than any human had ever gone. The first stage was research and design. The fleet needed to be powerful enough to survive the deep void, strong enough to defend itself, and intelligent enough to adapt to alien technology. Humans didn't know what waited out there. It could be a dying race asking for help, or it could be something far worse. The shipbuilders of Luna Base orbiting above Earth, started building the first of the ships. They were not like normal exploration vessels. They were massive, shaped like floating fortresses. Each ship was equipped with artificial gravity, quantum drives, and layered armor thick enough to resist radiation storms. There were laboratories for scientists, dorms for soldiers, gardens for food growth, and command decks that could control the entire fleet. To other species, this would have looked like preparation for war. But to humans, it was simply caution. Humanity's history had been full of challenges: wars, pandemics, climate disasters, and endless survival. Every time they fell, they rose stronger. They were a race born from struggle, and that struggle made them powerful. That is why the galaxy called them Deathworlders, survivors from a planet too dangerous for most species to live on. While the ships were being built, the message was studied more deeply. The signal seemed peaceful on the surface, but deeper analysis showed strange patterns, repeated bursts and frequencies that sounded almost like coded warnings. Some military experts grew suspicious. What if the message wasn't a request for help, but a trap to lure humanity into danger? Some even suggested sending a weapon instead of a rescue team. But Earth had changed. Humanity wanted to prove that they were more than warriors. They wanted to show that even a Deathworlder could be kind. In the middle of all this preparation, a young linguist named Dr. Ilara Sands joined the project. She was brilliant, calm, and deeply curious about alien languages. Ilara spent long nights studying the sound patterns of the signal, convinced that it was not hostile. "Listen to the rhythm," she told her colleagues. "There's fear in it, desperation. No one sends a threat that sounds like they're crying." Her words reached the ears of Admiral Hayes, the commander of the mission. He had seen war, loss, and peace, and something in Ilara's voice reminded him of humanity's best side, the part that still believed in hope. The construction of the fleet took months. Factories on Earth ran without pause, building engines, weapons, and life support systems. Thousands of workers signed up to help, and volunteers from every continent offered to join the mission. Some wanted adventure, others wanted redemption, and some just wanted to be part of history. The Artemis Armada became a symbol of unity. For the first time, the nations of Earth stopped fighting and worked together for a single purpose: to reach the stars. But even unity carried fear. In the dark corners of space monitoring networks, alien eyes were already watching. The message that reached Earth had been detected by other civilizations too. When they saw that the Deathworlders were preparing to move, they whispered among themselves. "The humans are rising again," they said. "They've answered the call." Some feared them, others admired them. But everyone knew that when humans moved, they moved with force. Finally, after months of endless work, the first of the Artemis ships stood ready. The flagship, named Solace, was a masterpiece of engineering, a mix of strength and beauty. It could cross light years in weeks and survive conditions that would crush most vessels. On launch day, thousands of people gathered around Earth's orbital platform. Children waved flags, families cried, and old scientists smiled with pride. Humanity was not just sending machines. They were sending their best people, brave men and women willing to leave everything behind for the unknown. Inside the ship, Admiral Hayes stood before his crew. His voice echoed through the communication system. "We don't know what waits for us out there, but whoever sent that signal needs us. We are not going as conquerors, but as protectors. We will show the universe what it means to be human." The crew saluted, their hearts pounding with both fear and pride. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. The engines roared, shaking the launch towers. Flames spread beneath the ships, turning night into day. As the numbers fell, the crowd held its breath. 3, 2, 1, and then with a thunderous boom, the Artemis fleet lifted off, climbing through the clouds like a rising sun. Humanity's greatest journey had begun. As the ships moved into deep space, Earth grew smaller behind them, a glowing blue dot in the darkness. The fleet activated its warp drives, creating ripples of energy that shimmered like waves of light. Inside the ships, scientists monitored systems, soldiers checked their weapons, and engineers whispered silent prayers. No one knew what awaited them on the other side of the stars. Back on Earth, the signal continued to play in the background of the monitoring stations. The message repeated endlessly, its distorted words echoing through the computers. Some thought it sounded like "help us." Others thought it said "beware." But whatever it truly meant, it had already changed everything. Meanwhile, Far across the galaxy on the dying world of Valara, the Valari people still waited. Their power grids flickered and their hope thinned like smoke. They had no idea that the ones coming to their rescue were not the peaceful alliance they expected, but a race known for surviving the impossible. They had called for mercy, but what they would receive was something much greater: humanity itself. As the Artemis Armada crossed into the dark space between stars, humanity unknowingly carried not just technology or weapons, but also their history, a history of endurance, courage, and a will that could not be broken. They didn't know that their arrival would be seen as a storm by others, or that entire galaxies would soon whisper about the Deathworlders movement. All they knew was that a voice from the stars had asked for help, and humanity had answered. They didn't yet realize that the signal was wrong, that it had changed meaning when it passed through broken channels. But it didn't matter. To humans it was still a cry for help, and when someone called for help they went, always. The engines of the fleet glowed like small suns as they disappeared into the blackness of space. Somewhere light years away the Valari were waiting. Somewhere an entire galaxy was watching. And somewhere in the middle of it all, destiny was quietly taking shape. A destiny born from a wrong signal, a dying world, and the unstoppable heart of humanity. The journey through deep space was long and silent. Stars stretched like lines of light as the Artemis fleet crossed the endless dark between galaxies. Inside the ships everything was calm but tense. The crew worked in quiet focus, studying charts, checking systems, and trying to decode the mysterious signal that had brought them all this way. Even though they had traveled farther than any human had before, a strange feeling of unease filled the air. No one really knew what they were heading into. Dr. Alara Sands sat alone in her cabin, listening again to the alien signal that had changed the fate of humanity. She had played it thousands of times, each time trying to catch something new in its rhythm. To most it was just noise, a mix of static and tones, but to her it felt alive. There was something emotional hidden in those sounds, something that made her chest tighten every time she listened. She whispered to herself, "You're afraid, aren't you? Whoever you are." After weeks of travel, the fleet finally reached the edge of the Valari system. The moment the stars outside shifted and the dying sun came into view, the entire command deck fell silent. It was a haunting sight. The star burned weakly, its light dim and red, barely strong enough to warm its planets. The nearest world, Valara, looked cracked and scarred. Its oceans were frozen at the edges, its cities dark like broken glass. Admiral Hayes stood at the front of the bridge, his jaw tight. "Activate scanners," he ordered. The crew began working fast. Radar and energy sweeps filled the air with beeping sounds. Soon, the results appeared on the screens. Massive radiation levels, destroyed satellites, and strange metallic objects orbiting the planet. "Those must be their defense systems," said one officer. "They're damaged but still active." Hayes nodded. "Open a communication channel. Let's introduce ourselves." The communication officers worked quickly, sending out a message in several frequencies, using Earth's universal language and basic symbols of peace. The message was simple. "We come in peace. We received your signal. We are here to help." They waited. Minutes passed, then hours. No response came. The longer they waited, the more anxious the crew became. Finally, a faint reply appeared on the screen, broken, weak, and full of static. The alien voice was shaky, filled with fear. The translator AI struggled to make sense of it, turning it into fragmented sentences. "Leave, system. Danger, you attack." The words confused everyone. Dr. Alara frowned. "That can't be right," she said softly. "It's a warning. They're afraid of us." Before anyone could answer, the ship's alarm blared. "Incoming objects!" shouted the radar officer. On the screen, several defense drones launched from the planet's orbit, heading straight toward the fleet. They fired energy beams, now weak and disorganized, but still dangerous. The ship's shields flared as the shots hit. "Defensive formation," Admiral Hayes ordered. "Do not fire unless absolutely necessary." The human fleet held position, blocking the attacks without shooting back. But to the Valari watching from their dying world, it looked terrifying. Their scanners showed giant ships covered in armor, glowing like small suns. Every time the human shields activated, they released flashes of blue light that shook the skies. The Valari thought they were seeing weapons charging. On the Valari capital, panic broke out. The leaders gathered in their underground command center, their faces pale. "The Deathworlders have come," said one of them in a trembling voice. Our message was heard by the monsters of the galaxy. To them, the stories of Earth were legends, tales of a brutal species from a deadly world that even the strongest civilizations feared. The Valari believed their destruction had arrived. Meanwhile, on the human flagship Solace, chaos filled the control room. Communication officers tried every possible language and frequency, but nothing worked. The misunderstanding was growing worse. Dr. Alara Sanz ran to the main console, her heart pounding. "Stop. Don't respond with weapon systems. They're scared, not hostile." Admiral Hayes hesitated. "They fired first," he said. "If we don't defend ourselves, we could lose lives." "They fired out of fear," Alara argued. "Please, let me try one more thing." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "You've got 5 minutes, Doctor." Alara quickly opened the message data from Valara again. She noticed something strange. The same tone repeated every few seconds in a pattern. To a military computer, it looked like a targeting signal. But to a linguist, it looked like emotional emphasis, like someone repeating a word while crying. She leaned closer to the console. "They're not trying to lock onto us," she whispered. "They're crying for help." But before she could explain, a sudden burst of noise filled the room. The defense drones were charging again. The fleet's automatic defense systems detected danger and prepared to fire back. If they shot even once, the Valari world would be doomed. Alara made a desperate decision. She overrode the ship's AI control system and canceled the retaliation command. The system protested, red lights flashing everywhere. Security guards ran toward her, shouting for her to stop. But she kept typing, her fingers flying across the console. "Trust me," she screamed. "If we shoot back, we'll destroy them." The room fell silent for a moment. The incoming fire from the Valari slowed, then stopped. Their drones were running out of energy. No more attacks came. The human ships remained still, waiting. Minutes passed. Then a weak transmission appeared again. The voice was trembling, uncertain, but this time clearer. The AI translator caught the words, "You not attack?" Alara smiled faintly. "No," she whispered, sending back a simple reply. "We came to help." Back on Valara, the leaders stared at the translation screens. For the first time, the message didn't sound threatening. It sounded calm. Their advisors hesitated, unsure whether to believe it. But then one of the young scientists stepped forward and said, "If they wanted to destroy us, we would already be gone." Slowly, they lowered their defense systems. The skies over Valara grew quiet again. The massive human ships remained in orbit, still and peaceful. To the Valari, they looked like silent guardians rather than enemies. Inside the human fleet, everyone let out a breath they didn't realize they'd been holding. Some officers were angry that Alara had overridden the system, but Admiral Hayes raised a hand to silence them. He looked at her with respect. "You may have just saved an entire species," he said softly. The crew worked quickly to stabilize communication. Using frequency bridges and universal translation codes, they began to build a real connection. The more they decoded, the more they understood how the signal had been corrupted. It wasn't a war message. It was a call for help that had been twisted by interference and power surges. As the first live image of the Valari appeared on the main screen, everyone on the ship went quiet. The aliens looked fragile, tall, thin, with luminous eyes full of sadness. They were not monsters or warriors. They were dying people begging for help. The entire bridge watched in awe as the Valari leader appeared, speaking softly. "You came," he said. "We thought you were here to end us." Admiral Hayes stood and saluted out of respect. "No," he said firmly. "We came because you asked. Humanity answers when someone calls." Tears filled the Valari leader's eyes. He turned to his people and whispered, "The Deathworlders are not what we were told." In that moment, everything changed. The fear between the two species began to fade. Trust, fragile but real, started to grow. Humanity had come prepared for war, but instead of destroying, they had saved. And it had all happened because one woman had listened, not with her mind, but with her heart. Dr. Alara Sanz stood by the window, watching the dying sun flicker weakly over Valara's horizon. She thought about how close they had come to disaster. One wrong word, one wrong decision, and billions could have died. All because of a single broken signal. But somehow, through courage and compassion, they had found peace in the middle of chaos. The crew didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The galaxy had been watching the entire event, and the news that the Deathworlders had chosen mercy over violence would soon spread to every corner of the stars. But for now, in that quiet orbit above a wounded world, humanity had proven what truly made them different. They were strong, yes. They were dangerous when pushed. But above all, they were capable of understanding, of forgiveness, and of helping even when the universe expected them to destroy. The wrong signal had reached humanity, but somehow it had found exactly the right hearts to answer it. The skies above Valara were quiet now, but the silence was heavy with emotion. The humans had stopped their defense systems, the Valari had lowered their shields, and for the first time both sides could finally see each other without fear. The red light from the dying sun washed over everything, making the world look old and tired, as if it had been waiting too long for this moment. Dr. Alara San stood beside Admiral Hayes on the command deck of the Solace. Her heart was still racing from what had just happened. She had risked her career, even her life, by overriding the ship's system, but now it felt worth it. The humans and the Valari were no longer enemies. They were finally starting to talk. A weak video signal appeared on the screen. The image flickered, then cleared. The Valari leader appeared, his face pale, his eyes glowing faintly blue. His voice trembled, but his words were clear this time. "We thought you were destroyers," he said. "But you came to help?" Admiral Hayes nodded slowly. "Yes," he replied. "Your message reached us. We didn't understand all of it, but we knew someone was in trouble. Humanity doesn't ignore cries for help." The Valari leader's eyes filled with tears. "Our world is dying," he said. "Our sun is fading. Our people are starving. We sent a signal for aid, but we thought it was lost." Ilara leaned closer. "It reached us," she said softly, "but the message got damaged along the way. That's why there was confusion. We thought it might be a warning or something else. You didn't do anything wrong. The universe just played a cruel trick." The Valari leader lowered his head. "Then we are sorry," he whispered. "Our defenses attacked you because we were afraid. We believed the old stories about your kind." Admiral Hayes gave a faint smile. "That's all right. We've been called worse," he said. "But we're not here to harm you. We'll do what we can to help." From that moment, everything changed. Humanity got to work. The fleet's engineers began scanning the planet's surface, mapping damaged areas and setting up energy beacons. The scientists started calculating how much power was needed to stabilize Valara's sun. They worked side by side, not as different species, but as one team fighting against time. The Valari watched from their ruined cities as human dropships descended from the sky. Huge machines landed with roaring engines shaking the frozen ground. Out of them stepped humans in heavy suits carrying tools and supplies. To the Valari, they looked like giants made of metal, but when the helmets opened and the humans smiled, they saw kindness instead of danger. Ilara was one of the first to step onto Valara's surface. The air was thin and cold, and her breath turned into mist as she looked around. The once beautiful cities were in ruins, covered in frost and dust. Buildings leaned at broken angles, and the wind howled through the empty streets. Children peeked from behind walls, their eyes wide with both curiosity and fear. Ilara slowly raised her hand and waved at them. A small Valari child hesitated, then waved back. It was a tiny gesture, but it meant everything. Over the next days, the humans worked non-stop. They built energy towers powered by nuclear fusion to provide warmth and light. They repaired communication networks so the Valari could talk again with their distant colonies. They even set up food synthesizers to feed the starving population. The human engineers moved like an army of hope, and the Valari began to believe again. But the biggest challenge was the dying sun. The human scientists proposed a bold idea: to stabilize it using quantum fusion injectors, technology that had never been tested on such a scale. It was dangerous, and failure could destroy the entire system, but there was no other choice. The Valari's own scientists joined hands with the humans to plan the operation. During this time, friendships began to form. The Valari discovered that humans were not monsters, but survivors. They listened to the stories of Earth, of how humans had fought through ice ages, disasters, and wars, yet always found a way to rebuild. To the Valari, it sounded like something out of legend. One of their elders said softly, "Maybe the Death World made you strong so you could save others." Ilara spent her nights translating their books and recordings, learning about their art and dreams. The Valari were a gentle people who had never known war. They made music that sounded like wind and light. When Alara played one of their songs through her translator, it made her cry. It was filled with the same emotion she had heard in their broken signal: sadness, hope, and longing. As the sun stabilization mission approached, the tension returned. The operation had to be done perfectly. If even one injector failed, the entire star could collapse. On the day of the mission, the fleet took position near the sun. From the orbit of Valara, it looked like a wall of human ships standing against the dying light. Admiral Hayes stood in the command room, watching the readings. "All teams ready?" he asked. The answer came back. "Ready, sir." Alara stood beside him, her hands trembling slightly. She wasn't a soldier, but she knew the risk. If the mission failed, none of them would make it home. Still, she believed in it. "They trusted us," she whispered. "We can't let them down." The operation began. The injectors were launched from the fleet, small glowing capsules diving toward the unstable star. They entered the sun's surface one by one, sending waves of light through its core. The entire fleet shook as energy readings spiked. Warnings flashed red on the control panels. "Reactor instability rising," shouted one of the technicians. "Hold it steady," Hayes ordered. "Do not abort." The minutes stretched like hours. The sun's surface boiled, growing brighter and brighter until the entire system was filled with golden light. The Valari watched from their cities, shielding their eyes, whispering prayers. On the human ships, systems began to fail one by one. Power levels dropped dangerously low. Alara leaned over the console, her eyes fixed on the readings. "Almost there," she said. "Just a few more seconds." Then, with a flash brighter than anything they had ever seen, the light stabilized. The violent flickering stopped. The red color faded, replaced by warm golden light. The dying sun had been reborn. For a moment, no one spoke. Then cheers erupted through the ship. The crew hugged each other, laughing and crying. Across the planet, the Valari looked up at the sky, their frozen lands glowing under sunlight for the first time in years. Some fell to their knees, others shouted in joy. Bells rang across the cities and tears streamed down faces that had forgotten what warmth felt like. On the Solace, Admiral Hayes looked at Alara. "You were right," he said quietly. They weren't calling for war. They were calling for hope. Alara smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "And hope answered," she said. For weeks after that, the humans stayed to help the Valari rebuild. They shared technology, medicine, and knowledge. They taught them how to maintain the energy systems, how to protect their planet, and how to communicate with other worlds safely. The Valari, in turn, shared their music, art, and philosophy, gentle lessons about peace and harmony that touched even the toughest human hearts. Soon, news of the event spread across the galaxy. Other civilizations began to hear that the Deathworlders, the most feared species of all, had saved a dying world instead of destroying it. Rumors spread fast. Some didn't believe it. Others began to see humanity in a new light. The galaxy that once feared Earth now began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the Deathworlders were not monsters, but guardians. But none of that mattered to Alara at that moment. She sat on the surface of Valara one evening, looking up at the revived sun. The golden light bathed her face, and the gentle hum of the rebuilt cities filled the air. A small Valari child sat beside her, drawing shapes in the sand. "You brought back the light," the child said softly. Alara smiled. "No," she said. "You did. You never stopped believing someone would hear you." The wind blew softly across the field, carrying with it the scent of life returning. For the first time in centuries, the world of Valara felt alive again. Humanity had not only saved a planet, they had changed how the universe saw them. But deep inside, Alara knew something greater had happened. A wrong signal had crossed galaxies, reaching a world of warriors and survivors. It could have caused destruction, but instead it created a bond. Two species from completely different worlds had learned to trust one another. And somewhere beyond the stars, other worlds were listening, wondering what would happen if one day they too needed help. Because now they knew that when the Deathworlders answered a call, they didn't come to conquer, they came to save. Months had passed since the sun of Valara was saved. The once dying planet had started to breathe again. The cold winds that once froze entire cities were now gentle breezes carrying warmth. The lakes were melting, the trees were sprouting new leaves, and laughter echoed in places that had long been silent. Humanity had done what no one thought possible. But the true change was not only in Valara's sky, It was in the hearts of those who lived under it. Alara Sounds woke up early every morning to the soft sound of music drifting from the Valari villages. It was a song of gratitude, a melody that the Valari played every sunrise to honor the humans who had brought back their light. She would stand by the window of the human base, a cup of coffee in her hand, and watch the golden rays touch the horizon. Every morning reminded her how close everything had come to disaster, and how something beautiful had been born from chaos. The humans and Valari now worked together as one. Their communication centers buzzed with both human and alien voices. Engineers from both worlds shared ideas, built new machines, and studied the reborn sun's stability. The Valari learned quickly, their minds sharp, their curiosity endless. What once was fear had turned into friendship. The term Deathworlders had started to lose its sting. The Valari children now used it playfully when referring to the humans, as if it were a title of respect. Admiral Hayes had been preparing the fleet to return to Earth. His job was done. The mission was a success. But part of him didn't want to leave. Valara had become something more than just a rescue mission. It had become a symbol of what humanity could be at its best. When the final meeting was held, the Valari Council requested to speak to him and Alara together. The Valari leader stood before them, no longer weak or fearful. His once dull eyes now shimmered with energy. "Before you leave," he said in his calm voice, "we wish to give you something. Not as payment, but as a sign that you are now part of us." He handed Alara a crystal sphere, glowing faintly blue. Inside it swirled threads of light like tiny galaxies trapped in motion. "This contains the song we sent into space," he said. "The one that reached you by mistake. It was meant to be a cry for help. But it became something else. It became a bridge between worlds. Keep it so you never forget that even mistakes can create miracles." Alara held the crystal close, feeling its warmth. "We won't forget," she said softly. "This was more than a mission to us. You showed us what hope looks like." After that, the fleet began preparing for departure. Cargo ships were loaded with samples, data, and memories. Valari craftsmen carved symbols into the walls of the human landing sites, a farewell gift written in their ancient script. It read, "Those who came from the death world brought the light of life." When the engines of the Solace roared to life, thousands of Valari gathered below, looking up at the sky. Some waved banners, others sang the melody that had once been their distress signal. But now it was not a song of sorrow. It was a hymn of friendship. The humans waved back from the viewports as their ships lifted into the atmosphere, leaving trails of silver against the blue sky. On board, the crew was silent for a while, watching Valara shrink below them. Admiral Hayes spoke quietly. "You don't see that every day. The galaxy is going to talk about this for a long time." Alara nodded, still clutching the crystal. "Let them talk," she said. "Maybe they'll finally understand us," and they did. Word spread fast across the stars. The story of Valara became known throughout the galactic community. The tales that once painted humanity as destroyers and savages began to fade. In their place rose new ones. Stories of bravery, compassion, and impossible courage. Civilizations that had once feared contact with humans began sending messages of peace and curiosity. For the first time in history, ambassadors from different worlds arrived at Earth's doorstep, not to warn but to learn. They wanted to understand the species that had saved a dying sun, the Deathworlders who had chosen mercy over might. Humanity's reputation transformed from a shadow to a beacon. But for Alara, the true victory was personal. She spent months after returning to Earth compiling her research about Valara. Her work wasn't just scientific. It was emotional. She wrote about their culture, their art, their kindness, and their faith that someone would listen to their plea. Her report was titled, "The Signal That Changed Everything." It was read across colonies and stations, inspiring a generation of explorers and scientists. One evening, while working late in her lab, a small light blinked on her communication panel. It was an encrypted message, "Me from Valara." She opened it immediately. The screen filled with the face of the Valari leader, smiling warmly. "The sun is stable," he said. "The crops are growing, the air is warm again, and our people sing every day. You have given us more than life, and you have given us a future." Ilara smiled, tears forming in her eyes. "You gave us something too," she replied. "You reminded us what humanity truly means. Meanwhile, Admiral Hayes was called to testify before the Galactic Council. Many alien representatives attended, eager to meet the man who commanded the human fleet during the Valara miracle. When he stood before them, there was silence. Everyone expected a speech about technology or strategy. Instead, Hayes spoke simply. "We came because someone asked for help. That's what we do. That's who we are." The chamber erupted in applause. For the first time, the word Deathworlders was spoken with admiration, not fear. Years passed. Valara and Earth became close allies. Trade routes were opened, cultural exchanges began, and both species grew stronger together. Human and Valari scientists worked side by side on new energy technologies, inspired by the same project that had saved the sun. Ilara often visited Valara again, not as a savior, but as a friend. Every time she landed, she was greeted by children running through green fields, their laughter echoing through the warm air. One day, as she walked near a restored city, a Valari girl tugged at her sleeve and handed her a small crystal. "My father says you brought the light back," the child said. Ilara smiled. "No," she answered gently. "The light was always here. You just needed someone to help you see it again." As night fell, Ilara stood by the ocean looking at the twin moons reflecting in the calm water. The sky above was full of stars, brighter than she remembered. Somewhere out there, other civilizations might be struggling, afraid to send out a signal, afraid that the wrong ones might hear it. But Ilara knew better now. Sometimes the wrong signal could reach the right hearts. Back on Earth, a new generation of explorers was preparing to journey into the unknown. The Valara event had changed the purpose of space exploration. No longer was it about conquest or discovery alone. It was about connection. The human fleet had been renamed the Lightbringers. Their mission was to travel to distant worlds, not to fight but to help those in need. Ilara often lectured young cadets, telling them about that first broken signal. "It came to us by accident," she would say, "but maybe the universe doesn't make mistakes. Maybe it wanted to remind us who we really are." Her words inspired millions. Across countless worlds, the story of Valara became a legend, a tale told by both humans and aliens alike. The once feared Deathworlders had become symbols of hope. Years later, long after Ilara retired, an expedition ship named Valara Dawn was launched. Its mission was simple: to search for lost or unknown signals across the galaxy. On its hull, engraved in golden letters, were the words, "Hope answers every call." As the ship disappeared into the endless stars, its captain, a young woman who had grown up hearing Ilara's stories, smiled and whispered, "If another wrong signal finds us, we'll answer again." And far away in the vast silence of space, a faint pulse of energy traveled through the void. Another message, another plea, another chance for the Deathworlders to prove who they truly were. The universe had changed forever. Humanity had risen not through power or fear, but through compassion. The wrong signal had reached them once, and they had turned it into a light that would guide the stars for generations to come.